Hey, good morning. Good to be here. Good to see you today again for our worship service. I was going to mention about the flowers too. Boy, amazing, isn't it? So, the duck's safe for the hunting season's coming up, but the duck will be safe there. So one duck less to be shot at. Myung's not here today. At the conference, they've got a women's praise and testimony and worship, secret women's business. So Myung's gone there till about 4:30. They have a concert in the afternoon. She was meeting some people that she'd met previously that were coming from other parts of Victoria. So that's why she decided to go there today. But she sends her greetings to you here at Fern Tree Gully. Oh man, I can't walk from here. Today's sermon is continuing on the Transforming Grace and Truth of Jesus, a series that I've started. And it was based on Max Lucado on the Bible app, gave me the inspiration for it. Andrew was talking about inspiration, so I got the inspiration for this service, where he talks about in John 1:14 how Jesus came into the world full of grace and truth. And so that's what we're looking at in this series. We looked at something from Steps to Christ. In the matchless gift of his Son, God has encircled the whole world with an atmosphere of grace as real as the air which circulates around the globe. All who choose to breathe this life-giving atmosphere will live and grow up to the stature of men and women in Christ Jesus. So the world is surrounded by an atmosphere of grace, but not everybody is aware of that. Now we talk about pessimist, the glass is half empty. Optimist says the glass is half full. But in the Bible, my cup runneth over. And so we're looking at some stories of Jesus' grace and truth when he was here on this earth. And last time we looked at the parable of the vineyard workers. 2 times ago we looked at the parable of the vineyard workers. The owner went out at different times of the day looking to hire workers. He had a crop to get in, and so he needed workers while the weather was good to bring in the wine, to bring in the grapes, so that he could have a successful harvest. So he went out to the marketplace at 6 a.m. early in the morning to get some workers. And he said, I'll give you a day's wage if you go out and work for me. But there was not enough workers, so he went out again to the marketplace. He went to 9 a.m., 12 noon, 3 p.m, and even 5 p.m. looking for workers. And he told these later people, I'll pay you whatever is fair. And then at 6 p.m, 1 hour after he'd hired the last workers, he gathered them all together, and each person received the same wage. 1 denarius, a day's pay. And the ones who worked from 6 a.m. were a little bit miffed. We've had some hot weather, fortunately not this past week, but in the past. And toiling in the hot weather is pretty tough. So these people who started at 6 a.m. were a little bit upset that they got paid the same as those who started at 5 p.m. But the only reason given was that the generosity of the owner, that he chose to treat them all the same. An illustration of God's grace towards them. Last time we looked at the prayer God refused to hear and the surprising prayer that moved him. We saw how there were 2 prayers who went to the temple to pray, a Pharisee and a tax collector. The Pharisee started his prayer very well. Do you remember what the words were that he started his prayer with? I thank you, God. What a great way to start a prayer. But unfortunately, he didn't thank God for all the good things God had done, but he thanked God how good he was. So not a really good way. It started well, but didn't end too good. And after he tells God all the good things about himself, he then says, and I really thank you, I'm not like this miserable tax collector that's here. The tax collector, he stood at a distance, almost as if he was scared to come nearer in case thinking he'd be in more strife with God. He didn't lift up his eyes to heaven. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow. And the originally said he beat his chest continually in sorrow. And he just simply said, "Have mercy on me, the sinner." Not a sinner, but the sinner. "Have mercy on me, the sinner." And Jesus said that it was the tax collector who actually went home reconciled, and not the Pharisee who thought it pretty good of himself. So again, grace and truth in the life of Jesus. And so today we're looking at another story, the transforming of grace and truth of Jesus. Now, if you're here today and if you're watching today, you must come back in 2 weeks, okay? Because I'm ending on a little bit of a negative note because I ran out of time. Either that or you stay another 40 minutes at the end of the sermon, which probably you don't want to do. So you've got to come in 2 weeks to actually get the second part and the good news part. Just a bit of a heads up. So we're looking at the rebellious and the resentful. We're looking at 2 ways you can be alienated from God. 2 ways, at least, of course, there's at least 2 ways. But in this story, we're looking at the 2 ways of being alienated from God, rebellious and resentful. So we'll have a look at the context of the story that we're looking at. If we go to Luke chapter 15 and verses 1 and 2. Luke chapter 15, verses 1 and 2. So before the text in our scripture reading, look at the context of what Jesus is going to teach about. 15th chapter of Luke, and we'll pick it up in verses 1 and 2. Okay, Luke chapter 15, verse 1. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners came out to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. Can you imagine even eating with them? And so the Pharisees and the teachers of the religious teachers of the religious laws, they would never associate with the tax collectors and sinners. And the reason they made a big deal about Jesus eating with them, because in those times, eating with someone was a sign of acceptance, of accepting them. And so that's why they made a big deal that Jesus is here not only associating with sinners, but he's actually eating with them as well. And so this really annoyed Jesus, and so he told some parables. He told 2 parables, first of all. First was of a lost sheep, and how a shepherd left 99 sheep in safety, and he went out at night looking for the one sheep that was lost. And when he found that one sheep, he went back rejoicing and invited his friends and neighbours to celebrate with him. Then Jesus told another parable, this time of a lost coin. A lady lost a coin, which was important for her, saving up for her marriage, probably. And so she searches diligently, sweeps the house, gets the lamp out, looking for the lost coin. And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbours over to celebrate that what was lost was found. And both parables concluded with Jesus saying that there's great rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents and turns to God. And so Jesus told these 2 parables, and then he told the third parable we're looking at today, which is a parable of 2 brothers and a father. Now, we're showing a video, a Facebook version of this parable up until a certain point. Now, because I'm not on anti-social media, I asked my son, is this sort of newish or oldish? He says, no, that's old, Dad, the old style of Facebook. So this is what Facebook would be like in Jesus' time. Okay, so just show briefly the story of the prodigal son. Okay, I'll show the second half next time. What I'm looking at today is the two sons rather than the father. Okay, so that's why you've got to come back in 2 weeks, because we're looking at the ways to be alienated from God. Next time, looking at, okay, how did Jesus react and what does this parable have to say about God the Father? So the two boys represent two different ways to be alienated from God. Now, I've got to fess up. When I prepare a sermon, like any preacher, you go to all sorts of sources and things like that. And I generally, it's not an academic paper that I put all the footnotes, but I did get quite a good inspiration from this particular book, The Prodigal God, by Timothy Keller. Now, this book was inspired by a sermon sharing the Father's welcome. Us pastors are totally unoriginal. So the book's based on a sermon, and this sermon's based on the book that's based on the sermon. But of course, I consulted other sources as well, and of course, also my own thoughts as well. But this was pretty impactful, so I thought I would mention that just to let you know. So let's have a look at the younger brother. Luke chapter 15, 11 to 19. Okay, continue. I'll only be looking at the book of Luke chapter 15 for this sermon today. Luke chapter 15, 11 to 19. Okay, we'll begin with verses 11 and 12. Okay, so remember, this has come after the two parables, the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost son. In verse 11, the lost coin, thank you. Rightio. Do you want to get up here and preach, Sue, instead? Luke chapter 15, verse 11. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had two sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between the two sons. The younger son wants his inheritance now. Doesn't want to wait, basically wishing his father to be dead. The younger son wants his father's things. He doesn't want his father. It was deeply disrespectful what he did, and it brought great shame upon the father, not only in the family, but in the whole community, for a son to do this, and even more so for the father to follow the son's request. Something, unfortunately, we're aware is also happening a lot today with elder abuse because of high cost of housing and for cost of living expenses. Children are sometimes putting undue pressure on parents to sort of go cough up some money. It's a real scourge on society at the moment. Of course, now, even in Bible times, as now, the father is free to distribute the father and mother are free to distribute any time they like. But that's quite different to somebody one of the children demanding to get their inheritance. And so the selfishness of the younger son comes through loud and clear when he talks about his share of the inheritance. But of course, the father is alive. It's fully the father's. It's not his share at all. His share is only when the father dies. So being quite presumptuous to talk about his share when he is entitled to nothing at that particular point in time. In verse 12, it says, so the father agreed to divide between them. So he had to divide the property. So it seems like he also gave it to the oldest son as well, or it was kept for the oldest son, what was left. And of course, the older son, as in Bible times, he would receive 2/3 of the estate, and the younger son 1/3. And this was the way that it was done, because the older son would typically be looking after the parents. So in those days, that's how it was divided up. Even though it says here that he divided his wealth between his sons, the word actually there is bios in the original language, which means life. So the father actually divided up his life. And the King James sort of alludes to this when it talks about he divided up his living or his livelihood. This was not just, a bit of land or whatever. This was his life. People had an attachment to the land. And so this was a big deal that some of it at least had to be sold off to cash out the younger one, even if the rest of the property was kept for the older son who was working there. And so he knew that the older son knew, well, I'll get what's left when my father passes away, but it was divided up between them. Verse 13. A few days later, the younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted his money in wild living. Here we see the real motive of wanting to be cashed out. Not because he wanted to stay at home and spend the money. He hated home. That was the bottom line. He hated home, and he wanted to move away from home. He wanted to move as far away from home as he could get. No longer was he wanting to work so hard on the farm, all the restrictions or so-called restrictions of the family, being in a hick country place. He wanted out of there. He wanted to go to the big smoke, go where things were happening. And so this was his motivation, not the money per se, but to get out of home, get out from under his father, and to be free. So-called free. And so he decides to move on. There's a bit of a play in words here in the original. It says here that he packed his belongings and he wasted his money. In the original, it says he gathered together his belongings and then he scattered them in his wild living. So he gathered everything that he had from his father, gathered all the blessings, gathered what the father had given him. Then he scattered them abroad and scattered them to everybody in wasteful living. Gathering and scattering is what he did. And so he went away to be away from the family. Ellen White says the youngest son had become weary of the restraint of his father's house. He thought that his liberty was restricted. His father's love and care for him were misinterpreted, and he determined to follow the dictates of his own inclination. The youth acknowledges no obligation to his father and expresses no gratitude, yet he claims the privilege of being a child in sharing the father's goods. The inheritance that would fall to him at his father's death, he decided to receive now. He is bent on present enjoyment and cares not for the future. Pretty good summary, isn't it? And so the first way to be alienated from God is open rebellion, as represented by the younger brother. Open rebellion. Rebellion, that is, until it all goes pear-shaped. Okay, let's continue reading verses 14 to 16 in Luke chapter 15. About this time his money ran out, and a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. So a great reversal now from having all the money, all the things from his father that ran out, and now he was hungry. Maybe hunger and starvation is not something many of us have experienced here. But yeah, we can guess at this time. He ran out of his Facebook friends. They were all nowhere to be found now that he had run out of money. And this happens in real life, actually. I knew a couple who were quite wealthy, and they lived the life of socialites. They came upon hard times, all their friends disappeared. And it still happens today. Nothing new under the sun. Nothing new under the sun. Verse 17, when he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here am I dying of hunger. Came to his senses. Now, was it for the love of the Father? It doesn't say that. It's not as if all of a sudden he realised, gee, Dad wasn't so bad after all. It was, gee, Dad's got money. Maybe home's not so bad after all. He went from anywhere but home to thinking of home sweet home. But yeah, not for any love of the Father. It was more the food, which naturally enough when you're starving. Okay, in fact, it says they have enough. They're spare. They've got overflowing amounts of food that are there. Okay, let's continue, 18 and 19. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. Now, this is not as low as we might think reading it, because there was two lots of servants. There was servants who were owned by the master. They lived on the property, and they were part of the property of the master. Okay, so that was sort of the household servants. But what this young man is wanting to be is not one of those. Okay, not one of those. There was another group, and they were sort of workmen or tradesmen or craftsmen who worked for a particular person, but they lived in the village. Okay, so they were like an employed or a contractor or whatever, okay? That's what the young man wanted. He wasn't quite ready to be, just a servant who lived on the grounds. He wanted to be one of the hired people that the father employed, to sort of ask the father to apprentice him to one of these tradespeople, and then he could work and he could pay back, or so he thought. Because the rabbis taught that if you violated the community standards, an apology was not sufficient. You had to make restitution. And so this was in the young person, the younger brother's mind. He's got to make restitution for what he's done. And so the way to do that is not to be a lowly servant, but to be sort of a tradie or whatever that the father employed, and then he would begin to pay off the debt. Now, of course, he had zero chance of paying the debt. He had zero chance of repaying all that he had squandered. They weren't making that much. So yeah, the rebellious way of alienation from God. But being rebellious is not the only way to be alienated from God. As I said, today I'm not really looking specifically at the father's reaction to either son. We'll be looking at that next time. Just looking at the ways to be alienated first. Have you ever been the last person to find out something that everyone else knows, but you feel you should have been told about that? How did you feel about that at the time when everyone else is knowing and somehow you've been left out? We don't like being left out of what's going on, do we? I had that experience when I had a heart attack. I landed in hospital. Because this is going on the internet and stays forever, I won't name the hospital, but anyway, some of you probably know which one it is. But yeah, I landed in hospital after having a heart attack, and having tests and blah blah blah, and talking with all sorts of doctors and things like that, but I didn't really know what was going on and what was going to happen. And then one morning the nurse came in, as usual, and the nurse said, so you're going off to X hospital to have a triple bypass. I said, what? Nobody had told me about this, that I was going to be going to another hospital and that I needed a triple bypass. So I was in shock. And the nurse just said it casually, as if sort of, well, of course, everybody knows about it. And I was as mad as a cut snake about this, that decisions were being made and not even speaking to me about it. So anyway, I said, I'm not moving until I talk to people. I'm not moving anywhere. And so finally a cardiologist did come and explain everything and explain the options and things like that. But it's not nice to be not told of something, especially something that affects you, and decisions are being made that you don't know about. Well, anyway, that's the experience now of the older brother, because the younger son has come home. Let's continue and read 25 to 30. Okay, I'll read 25 to 27 first, Luke 15. Meanwhile, the older son is in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house. And he asked one of the servants, what's going on? Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return. So, this is not going to end well with the older brother, is it? Seems like nobody bothered to tell him. He's working in the field, slaving away, working in the field, doing whatever you do in the field. And meanwhile, there's a party going on at home. No one's told him about it. He only hears about it at knock-off time. At knock-off time, when he goes back home, he's hearing all this music and stuff. So nobody bothered to tell him about the party. This is probably the biggest party the father has thrown, and no one bothered to tell him. So he's as mad as a cut snake too. And maybe we've got a little bit of sympathy for him, that nobody bothered to tell him. Instead, he had to ask a servant. So we know that this is not going to end well. So first of all, the younger son disgraces his father by asking for his inheritance and from getting cashed out and wasting it all. But now it's the older son's turn to disgrace his father. Let's read about it in verses 28 to 30 of Luke 15. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him. But he replied, all these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time you never gave me even one goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf. Now, he obviously hadn't gone to the psychologist that you use I words, not you words, when you talk to people. And that I words are better. I feel this way. No, you're. So he was one unhappy camper, to say the least. And it says that he was angry. In other parts of the Bible, when the word in Greek, it's translated as livid, angry, furious, filled with wrath. Okay, he was mad. He was, as we could tell by what he said. It's a bit, like parents when children do something good. Say, yeah, that's my son. When they do something bad, he's your son. Okay, and that's what the older brother does. He doesn't say my brother. He says your son, not my brother. He's your son. And so, he was obviously pretty ticked off by what was happening. And he refuses to go in. And this is something that would disgrace the father. The father's put on a party, a celebration, and yet the son is not going in. This is very humiliating for the father. And so, the older son, he basically replies to his father, "I've never disobeyed you. I've got rights. I've got rights. You owe me. You owe me. I've slaved away. You owe me, not this younger son who's wasted everything." Christ's object lesson, it says, when the father comes out to remonstrate with him, the older brother, the pride and malignity of his nature are revealed. He dwells upon his own life in his father's house as a round of unrequited service, and then places in mean contrast the favour shown to the son just returned. He makes it plain that his own service has been that of a servant rather than a son. When he should have found an abiding joy in his father's presence, his mind has rested upon the profit to accrue from his circumspect life. His words show that it is not for this he has foregone the pleasures of sin. Now it is his brother. Now, if this brother is to share in the father's gifts, the elder son counts that he himself has been wronged. He grudges his brother the favour shown him. And so the bitter son is actually further from home than the son who went to a far country. The older son who stayed at home was actually further away from home in his heart than the younger son who had left to the far country. He had no love for the father. He was keeping his father's orders as drudgery. He was working for him in slavery, not in pleasure for his father. And so he actually says he's just like his youngest brother in one way. He wants a good time with his friends. Not interested in the father. He wants a good time with his friends, just like the younger son did as well. And so we see the second way of being alienated from God, resentment. Resentment. Following everything, doing all the right things, but resenting it. The second way to be alienated from God. So the two sons were both alienated in different ways. The younger son through rebellion, but the older son through resentment while still following the rules. There was something that caught my eye when I was preparing for this. Okay, this text here, Luke 15:29, and he answered, this in the King James, chose it for a reason, and he answering said to his father, "Lo, these many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment. And yet thou never gavest me a kid that I might make merry with my friends." I've done everything. I've done everything you've told me to do. I've obeyed your commandments. And yet, you've never done anything for me. That's what he was saying. Never done anything for me. For him, working for the father was just one of slavery and drudgery. Never acknowledged the blessings that he received of being in the father's household. So I've got some questions. Could we as Christians, and especially Seventh-day Adventist Christians, have the attitude of the older brother? Could we have that? Because of our rightfully strong position on keeping all the commandments, could we fall in the trap of thinking God owes us? God owes us salvation. And people who don't keep all the commandments should not be saved. Could we be like the older brother who keeps the commandments through gritted teeth, yet resent God and don't have joy and resent God as a killjoy or a slave driver? Now, I'm not pro-breaking the commandments or anything like that, of course not. But could we put them in the wrong place, and could we actually be alienated from God even as we obey the commandments? Okay, this is the reason why you've got to stay, or not stay, come back in 2 weeks' time. Okay, there was a global survey of our church where the church asked various questions about salvation and other things. Okay, this is one of the questions asked. Salvation is through Jesus Christ alone. Okay, salvation is through Jesus Christ alone. Okay, this is what the world church said. Okay, quite a lot. Okay, blue. Now, don't ask me why they put the scale the way they did. Now, what's happened there? Oh, boy. Oops, could we go to the fourth last, the first survey, please? Something went wrong there. The fourth last one. Yep, that's the one. Thank you. Okay, so worldwide, okay, the big blue one is strongly agree and the lighter blue one is agree. So it's roughly about 92, 93% said salvation is through Jesus Christ alone. Wow, that's pretty good, isn't it? In the South Pacific Division, that's where we are. Australia's part of the South Pacific Division, which includes Australia, New Zealand and New Guinea and the Pacific Islands, okay? So what was the result in our division? Okay, even higher, okay, even higher. So it turns out it was about 97% agreed salvation is through Jesus Christ alone. Wow, that's pretty good, isn't it? Okay, people know that we're saved by faith alone. Okay, wonderful, wonderful, almost. Okay, let's have a look at another question. I will not get to heaven unless I obey God's law perfectly. Okay, I will not go to heaven unless I obey God's law perfectly. Worldwide, look at that. Roughly, what's that, 43 plus 24? 51, 64, about 67, 2/3 of people agreed. Either strongly agreed or agreed that I must obey God's law perfectly. Elder brother stuff. Elder brother stuff. Okay, and if you add the 8%, you're looking at almost 3/4 roughly. Now, what about in our division? Surely, no, in our division, we're a bit more better than the rest of the world. We're worse. We are worse in this division. Oh my goodness. Roughly 75% agree or strongly agree with this statement. Elder brother thinking. So intellectually, we say 97% say we're saved by faith in Christ alone, yet 75% we've got to keep the law perfectly. Not even, okay, of course we should keep the commandments, okay, but not because we're not to be saved, but because we are saved, okay. But don't worry, it gets worse. Following the health message ensures my salvation. Following the health message ensures my salvation. Survey says, okay, not too bad. Okay, now remember the numbers are reversed. It's about, 44% who strongly agree or agree. Okay, but then when you add the 15% who are not sure, there's 59% either agree or are not sure that following the health message, living a healthy life, ensures salvation. Unfortunately, it gets worse in our division, okay? A bit high, slightly high, quite a bit higher there. 62% agree or strongly agree with that statement. What is going on? What is going on why do we have this elder brother thinking? That we agree, 97% agree that we're saved by faith alone in Christ Jesus, and yet, how did this happen? I hope in my churches would be 0% for both of those last two questions. But this is sobering stuff. How could we have got an attitude of the elder brother. I haven't disobeyed any of your commandments, and have it in for the father for showing love to the one who came home. So this is why you must come back in 2 weeks, because in 2 weeks' time we'll be looking at how does God deal with the rebellious and the resentful. Okay, how does God deal with the rebellious and the resentful? So come back in 2 weeks' time. It does get better, okay? It does get better when we look at this parable through those eyes. Okay, we'll now have our closing hymn, which is His Mercy is More. His Mercy is More.